Everything.
Just 1 second, all this.
Oh, okay, yeah, she's coming back. Get back in.
I mean, like I said.
So that's why I take my glasses off.
Yeah.
Get rid of it.
But she's not.
Yes.
Okay, we're good. So we are back, resumed from our break.
Back on the record, we have our full quorum back for the record, and we're continuing our public comment.
Hello, my name is Patricia Duncan, Duncan. I live on Brook Hollow Lane in Bernardsville. And I've already said some of these things before. That
But you're first to be sworn in, so it counts as testimony.
Okay.
All of a sudden, everybody wants, you swear to God or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I've already,
What number we'll call
250-1.
Thank you very much.
250-1. I live on a private road, so the only thing I get from my taxes are police and roads. And other than that, I've never had children in the school system, and I've been paying really high taxes for the last 35 years. Okay, my first thing that I've said in the past is that when I'm the kind of nerd that reads the small print to the back of the Bernardsville News. And one of the things that really struck me was that they're calling this an urban renewal project. We are not urban. And I don't know that it was need of renewal. In the past, I worked for the Jersey City redevelopment. And that is and was a blighted area. And I can tell you that 50 years ago, I worked where it's now really pretty in downtown Jersey City. But it took 30, 40 years for those things to happen. They don't happen quickly, especially if you're going for state and federal funding as an urban renewal project. Secondly, all these assumptions were made when the interest rates were 3 and 4%. Now the interest rates are at 7% plus. How is the developer planning to finance this? And you know, how exactly, you know, and why is it called an urban renewal unless they're going for other funding?
I'm sorry,
Other
how
than
is it? I'm sorry.
Other funding.
No, I didn't hear.
I said, why is it called an urban renewal, other than that they're going for state and federal funding for this project? The developer is not putting up so money on this. So his risks are much lower. The third thing is the fact that the town gave the owners of the property a tax abatement of 30 years, and yet they it was $77,000, about $77,000 in taxes for their plot of land. But yet they're maintaining the ground underneath that project. So that 20 years from now, 50 years from now, the Palmer family will still own that property. The developer is only getting a lease of the land. Let me think what else. So I just really question, you know, that this was rushed through. And I don't know when it was rushed through, but I've been going to meetings for over a year now, and the people did not really consider all the repercussions. the schools, to the traffic, et cetera. So thanks for letting me share.
Kerry, Kerry, Hazelton, Haselton, 397 Brook Road.
Please raise your right hand. You swear to God or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Hi, everyone. After months of meetings, cancellations, delays, and postponements, requiring residents to clear their schedules time and again, our moment has arrived deep in the summer season, and many are away. I want to note that two of the small business owners downtown who have been attending meetings are not here. The owner of the Bernardsville Cinema frequently attends and tried to be here for earlier meetings, but we didn't get to public comment. And Rich at the print shop, another person who's come often, so they're missed. The in-person requirement for planning board testimony hamstrings the public's right to speak. But I'm here and all my neighbors are here, and I thank the board for the opportunity to be heard. My heartfelt thanks go to this board for its careful scrutiny, pointed questioning, and tireless efforts to improve this application for the safety and overall benefit of residents and the borough as a whole. Despite the fact that our council has tied your hands behind your back and left you with far less influence than you deserve, you pushed the applicant to correct setback errors and inch the development back from the county right of way on Mount Airy. You worked to ensure the developer delivers the sidewalk width promised and redesigns the unsafe delivery entrance. You gained the removal of the tower element. None of this would have happened without your pushback, and we thank you. As a 32-year Bernardsville resident and a lifelong resident of the local area, I've witnessed many changes at Alcott Square over the decades, but none so massive as the proposed development of the Palmer properties. Is it really to be called Palmer Square? Palmer Square at Alcott Square? The Palmer Building and Palmer Square at Alcott Square? It will sow confusion. In 2020, the planning board created the zoning for the downtown core, increasing the height limit to 3 stories. The application from Advanced Realty to develop the Palmer lots quickly cropped up, proposing a huge 4 to 5 story rental apartment building near the crest of a hill across the street from our historic old library. Anyone driving northbound on 202 will see this behemoth looming over the Palmer building. A more prominent position of a building out of scale with the community could not be imagined. The applicant has taken advantage of every available bit of square footage on the ground and airspace above to maximize the dimensions of this building. The plans reflect exceptions on the height and number of stories. Taken together, these exceptions result in a 5-story elevation along Mount Airy Road and the railroad tracks. Yet the architect testified that the complex will have about the same visual impact as a typical Victorian house. More like a Victorian palace. Why is this a 4 to 5 story building in violation of the 3-story zoning for the area that was just enacted? Because the council decided, in opposition to this board, that this particular property is so in need of reimagining, and our downtown is so downtrodden that no developer would be interested in coming here without special dispensations, including the height of the building and a pilot tax abatement that will relieve the developer of paying school and county taxes for a minimum of 30 years. Wow. The other residential and commercial property owners, that's you and me, will be expected to pick up the slack and subsidize this apartment complex and any others that are granted a pilot in the future. Let's not let this approach become the model for Bernardsville. Any deal that a for-profit corporation wants to strike with the borough will leave us ultimately on the losing end. I believe that the designation of this area in need has short-circuited the process and requirements that should be met every single time a variance from zoning is granted. Namely, that granting a variance does not result, it benefits, the public good and not solely the developer, and that granting the variance does not result in a substantial detriment to the zone plan. This development would fail on both these parameters. The additional stories beyond the 3 normally allowed benefits only the developer and sets a dangerous precedent for future developments to likewise exceed the height limits. Any enhancement to the public good, and that itself could be argued, could be achieved with a smaller building. I question the existence of any areas in need of redevelopment in Bernardsville. At the state level, this legislation was passed to encourage change that would revitalize areas that are desperately depressed. While the Bernardsville downtown has changed, adding more restaurants and service businesses in place of bricks and mortar retail, these changes result more from the advent and popularity of online shopping and delivery services than anything else. In fact, the only recent emptying out has been on the Palmer property itself, when the owners refused to renew the lease of a small business that had been serving the community for decades to make way for this massive overdevelopment. Bernardsville is thriving. There are young families moving in. Any house that goes on the market for less than $1.2 million is snapped up in days or hours. Our camps, town pool, movie theater, and community events are full to capacity. The state of the borough is good and getting better. Tell anyone circling the municipal parking lot on a Friday after 5 that the borough is struggling, and you will get a quizzical look. We are in need of vision and creativity, not tax abatements, zoning adjustments, and ridiculously low residential parking requirements that will hurt the existing retail businesses and restaurants we are purportedly trying to help. Yeah. If shoppers cannot park, they cannot shop. The businesses we have will suffer, and new businesses will not be established here. Parking is already hard to come by downtown. This development will make that worse. We are also in need of affordable housing. It flummoxes me that there are no affordable units within this proposal on a lot so very close to mass transit. Instead, the developer promises a $1 million contribution to our affordable housing fund, far less than the calculations require for a development of this size. Notably, we have heard no discussion regarding the timeline and process for development of this site under this plan or any plan. While realizing that unforeseen factors can change things, in general, how quickly would a project move from approval through permitting, remediation, environmental testing, demolition, construction, and finally occupancy? When should the community be prepared for the traffic and construction stuff to hit the fan at this major intersection? And how long will it last? Will it start a year from now? 2 years? Will it last 5 years? We haven't heard. For all the disruption of construction, improper scale, traffic snarls, insufficient parking, and financial risk this development would saddle us with, the one and only thing we would get in return is a wider sidewalk at the corner of 202. This would be a plus for pedestrians, especially those with disabilities or infants in strollers. But the fact that the Palmer building is slated to remain on site means that there will continue to be a choke point within the roadbed at that corner. This condition is extremely dangerous to cyclists. The Palmer building is, or would be, an attractive building if it weren't nearly in the travel lane. Lopping the addition off will not materially change that fact. The sidewalk will still be in the same location it is today. There is no room for adequate shoulder in the plan. Going forward, we need striping on the roadway, like that in Morristown, reminding drivers that cyclists can use the whole roadway. Otherwise, we are discouraging alternative and green transportation and imperiling our neighbors. The intersection will remain essentially unchanged from the days of horse and buggy, and later that traffic cop who stood in that little circle. Think about it as well. The Palmer Building has not been fully leased for years, even though it has a huge private parking lot directly behind it. Without dedicated parking, will it be attractive to businesses at all? Why not retain the Boylan House, which dates to the Revolutionary War, merits mention in the master plan, and has been included on the Borough Historic Walking Tour? Why not create a residential and retail complex around it? Whether we walk, bike, or brave the traffic on a drive into town on Mount Airy Road, we get a chance to take a good, long look at our beautiful murals. Welcome to Bernardsville, small town, big community. If this complex is built as depicted, the very next thing we will see is a 5-story building, a roll-up garage door, and a glimpse of a garden through the bars of a locked gate. The irony here is glaring. A gated community is not a welcoming one. Locking people out does not advance community spirit. The tax-paying public has asked for more pocket parks and more greenery downtown. The master plan calls for same. I urge the board to require the developer to open the gates and allow the community to traverse or sit a spell in a garden that our taxes are subsidizing through the pilot and the reduced contribution to affordable housing that this developer has been granted. From an environmental standpoint, I do favor thoughtful and sensitive development of land already in heavy use over bulldozing wetlands and steep slopes to provide housing. But this plan is neither thoughtful nor sensitive to the character and realities of Alcott Square. We've been promised that the designation of an area in need would enable the borough to work with the developer to arrive at a plan for this most visible and important site that works for both the borough and the builder. In this case, the council asked nothing of the builder and granted a much larger building than our downtown zoning would permit. Crucially, this application presents a plan that does not meet the specifications of the redevelopment plan. The relevant sections of the redevelopment plan are in the bulk standards, height and number of stories, and in the definitions. The bulk standards say that the building cannot exceed 4 stories. They also say that height, not number of stories, is measured from the pre-development grade. The downtown core standards are inapplicable, as the redevelopment plan clearly states that the bulk standards contained in the redevelopment plan supersede those in the land development code. The redevelopment plan is clear on how stories are measured in the definitions section. It states, under story, that if the first floor surface is higher than 6 feet above grade, not pre-development grade, existing grade at that point, then it is considered a story for purposes of the redevelopment plan. The architect testified at a meeting that I attended that it is over 6 feet at the southwest corner, which is the right side of the Mount Airy elevation, and across the entire railroad track side, the south elevation. So it's 5 stories. They presented no testimony in support of a variance, and therefore the application should be denied. To make things right, this development should be under a new application, presenting a building 1 story smaller and featuring a garden available to all. The Boylan House should be the building slated to be preserved, as it makes the most sense historically. It's on our historic walking tour and listed in our master plan. As Tom Lubke of the Commission of Fine Arts in Georgetown recently stated, quote, "Historic properties are a non-renewable resource. Once you've lost the fabric itself, you've lost it forever." This is the sort of conversation I imagined would take place given the area in need designation. An honest discussion of the master plan and the resources on site that should be considered before moving forward. It seems no such discussion occurred. I believe the community is in favor of revitalization, but not rampant redevelopment, the erasure of our eclectic mix of building styles and ages. Granting this application opens the door to the wholesale destruction of Alcott Square as we know it. Far Hills and Basking Ridge have resisted the pressure to upend their lovely and historic downtown. We must do the same. I'd like to see us stick with our 3-story limit on downtown core properties. 3 stories is adequate in our small town, big community. Lastly, we should take advantage of this once in 2 centuries opportunity and reimagine the traffic and layout, the traffic flow and layout at Alcott Square. This development makes that impossible. And that, I think, is both irresponsible and unfair to future generations. Thank you, everybody, for showing up tonight after so many postponements and false alarms. Perhaps going forward, we should allow residents to submit written statements to the planning board administrator for consideration by the board. After all, this is our money. Tax abatements have been granted. I'm sorry?
No, responding to something.
Okay.
Something to say.
Sorry, this is our money. Tax abatements have been granted here. We all deserve a chance to comment on this application, whether we can be in Bernardsville at 7:30 on a given Thursday night or not. And thank you again for your time and close attention to this application.
Any more? If you're hesitant, get up, now's your time.
My name is Rudy Brodowski, Grodowski.
You have to give your address as well.
Oh, 29 Center Street. I'm a resident of Bernardsville for 39 years.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to God or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Please proceed.
Well, thank you for this excellent presentation you just gave. Practically took everything out from what I wanted to say. Anyway, I'm shocked by this horrible tenement that's gonna be built right in the center of our town. It doesn't fit in here, and it seems to have come out of nowhere. For 2.5 years, my wife and I were sort of huddling in our house because of the COVID. Fortunately, we didn't get COVID, but we didn't go anywhere. We had no communication with our neighbors, we didn't do anything, and as a result, this sort of like fell down on me, just like about a year ago. Was the first time I heard about it. And I'm shocked by it. This tenement is gonna have so much density, it's going to be higher than, from what I read in the paper, from probably any building in Somerset County. That's what I read in the paper about 3 months ago. And I don't see why that should occur. I'm also shocked by these pilot payments, as the lady just mentioned. These pilot payments are just a cut to the people who are going to be building this horrible building. And as a result, we're going to have to pay the difference.
Yeah.
For 30 years, and I certainly don't want to pay their share of taxes. I have enough taxes to pay myself. And this is gonna last for 30 years. I would like to know how this is going to affect my neighborhood. I live 3 streets from here. I live on Center Street, which is really a narrow street, difficult to navigate, and there's parking supposedly on one side of the street. But that's not the way it works. Now people are parking on the other side of the street. It's difficult to get through. People are driving by with trucks. And if there are 2 cars parked on the street, opposite of each other, you're risking getting your car damaged. How is this going to affect my neighborhood? Are people going to come? Where are they going to park? On my street? On the street surrounding? Okay, that's probably what's going to happen. Furthermore, I don't hear much, I hear a lot of talk about this tenement, but I don't know how this is going to affect my neighborhood. I don't hear anything about how it's going to improve my neighborhood. Tom Malinowski, our former congressman, and Mayor Knox worked hard to get federal money to put a bridge from Prospect Street to the train station, so that people could safely walk to the center of town instead of walking down Mount Airy Road where you're risking your life. The sidewalk's about this wide, trucks can flying by, the speed limit's too high. Okay, so how is that though? Why hasn't that been worked? I don't hear anything about that anymore. We've got the money supposedly, so where is it? Where's the construction starting on that? The other thing is, I believe that everyone in this town should have the right to vote their decision on whether this project should continue. Like I said, it came out of nowhere for me. I'm sure that the same thing happened to a lot of other people. What's this? And I believe that there should be a vote for the people of the town, and that they should make a decision on whether they want this or how they want it. That's all I have to say, folks. I hope I made an effect as to what should be done.
Hi, my name's Mary Ann Bieksa, Mary, capital ANN. My last name is capital BIEKSZA. Most of the people here know me as Sam.
And you're-
I live at 1514 Pine Street in Bernardsville.
Please raise your right hand. You swear to God or affirm the testimony you're about to give us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Absolutely.
Absolutely proceed.
Hi, I live in the affordable housing on Pine Street where I have resided for 29 years. We are all owners, we don't rent. That might be why you look at that particular development and say, this is a success, this looks great. And it does, we work hard at that. I think that this particular project stinks. I think it's a way to get money for the Palmers. And I love the stewardship of the Palmers in the 29 years I have lived here. But this is throwing us under the bus. I think it's also a way to line the pockets of the developers, which everyone's here to make money. I understand that, I agree with that. But this has been an overkill with the Palmers playing every single card that they could play to get advantage, and I really don't know why, from the town. So these are things that we need to look at. Additionally, you have to look at two main arterials. You have 202, you have Mount Airy Road. You have at least 3 additional developments going up in this town. 5, we have 5 additional developments going up in this town. Where's the coordination of these developments? If you have an accident or a fire or something happens, how are the rescue workers going to get through on 202 and Mount Airy? If you have stagnation going up to Dayton Crescent, I don't see any of the developers kicking in additional money to shore up our infrastructure. To look at maybe Atlantic Ambulance coming in to take some of the burden off of the rescue workers that are all volunteer right now. Even if you look at the sewer system, which we're talking about the stormwater, can we accommodate that? We can't even accommodate the car dealership that was downtown, the Audi dealership. They don't have a functioning toilet in there. So what about the rest of that side of the street? What about Walters? That was the nursery. What is the sewer system like on that side of the street? Yeah, these are all questions that present themselves, and there are more questions to this development than there are answers. And especially the 30-year tax burden that is really going to hit us. Having this particular proceeding during the height of summer vacation, it says it all. It stinks. So thank you for all your work and for the many, many countless hours of meetings that you guys have endured. And letting me speak.
Anyone else? Most of you have spoken, so that's good, but. All right, seeing none. Couple of comments. One is that, as you know, as was stated, we're allowed to consider certain things, you know, in handling an application, and any frustrations you have with pilot or you know, other aspects of it are, we listen and can sympathize, but they're actually topics for the council. We also understand that a lot of those proceedings, it was said, well, don't worry, you can go and talk when it comes to the planning board. So that's been a challenge for all of you. We prepared, and some of you have been here all these times, you've prepared an exceptionally long list of stipulations that we're collaboratively working with the applicant for. And just like you may be complimenting us on our diligence, I'd like to point out that the applicant has actually come back and accepted a lot of those suggestions and so forth. So it's not all bad. They've come to the plate on many of our constructive, collaborative suggestions. We have a bit of a predicament that our police department and fire department have not responded to the planning board's repeated inquiries and requests for reports. The elements of the fire department have worked with the applicant in meetings, constructive collaborative meetings to ensure, let's say, a higher graded and more and a safer construction, and the applicants worked with them constructively and accepted those positive recommendations. However, we have nothing, the police or fire. The police is normally there's not a lot. The police review it and they say that's fine, but your concerns have been related to safety. And that is one of the dominant concerns of the police department is traffic safety and pedestrian safety. So we're in a bit of a predicament there. It's our problem. The applicant isn't supposed to have to do that. Just giving you the facts transparently. We have had discussions about enhancing and working with the council and good chat and so forth on trying to ensure that the crosswalks are significantly enhanced. It's a borough concern. It's not just this applicant. You know, the problem exists there today. So that's in the works. The applicant also, yes, there's much more clearance at the intersection. However, a lot of that is in the domain of the DOT and county. terms of what can be moved and so forth. We don't have, final plans on, stormwater. And, that's also been a topic that you raised, correctly. Although there have been some stipulations to help mitigate contaminated runoff from the, collaborative, stipulations to mitigate contaminated runoff from the actual parking decks. There is, and kind of unusual, sort of a first time situation where the state has, requested that towns deal with climate change and the, implications of, severe, events, related to that. We actually have to prepare in the future a section on that, aspect in the master plan. Also, the Office of Emergency Management, becomes part of that, discussion. This application, in addition to having the code mandated emergency, power capabilities for anything related to personal life safety and elevators and exit lights and so forth. There's also a clause that, says, and based on our experience in the town, in the event of an elongated power emergency, how are these 68 residential units going to be powered? So that, for the safety of the individuals and to understand whether there's a new burden on the town to take 68 units worth of, occupants into the library. So there is a clause, and it's a couple sentences, but it basically says that the applicant does need to provide emergency power to the residential units, which is a significant, let's say, upgrade from just the minimal, power. We haven't had the time in these many meetings, we haven't had, time to go through that, explicitly. But it is one of the outstanding, questions. On the subject of traffic, just reviewing prior statements and testimony, it appears, yes, the applicant, completely revamped the, loading, zone and implemented the, Mount Airy, loading, ramp, and places and so forth. In my, even with the minimal, retail traffic that exists in the current Palmer property today, that uses that Mount Airy exit and entrance, after you read the sign that says you're not allowed to use it. The loading into that, area is actually pretty decent. It may in fact even reduce traffic there. There's still some outstanding questions as to whether the county may put a restriction on turning and so forth, but I think from the standpoint of just the backup on Mount Airy, this application is, I would say, almost innocuous on the Mount Airy side, that's my opinion, but the board. However, we have not been able to think of a great way to handle the driveway, the main driveway traffic. And you guys all know what that traffic is and how it backs up. And there is a site here, it has that driveway right in the center of it and so forth. We don't see any magic that, will address that. And that's kind of where it sits. We talked about potentially left-hand turn prevention when you're exiting, and we felt that would actually probably severely impact the neighborhoods more with people making the right hand turn and quickly going up and going on Wesley or something else.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
apologize for the interruption. I just want to make sure we're clear though, that we have, I don't want anybody to misunderstand. We have not yet closed the
Right.
hearing, nor have we begun deliberations.
correct.
I voted for it. I believe
This
you
is
might
what
be
perspective-
segueing into certain areas you may still want to address with the applicant, if I'm not mistaken, but I just didn't want it to delve into deliberations, which
No.
we have not
We
yet
don't
got.
wanna. the
I'm sorry,
applicant
which
still
we
needs
have
to
not-
close.
I'm sorry, which we have not yet gotten to.
Right. But I wanna give you some perspective, and fairness, there are. If we go through the stipulations at some point, then there are potentially additional stipulations. Which you've seen, you know, some of the stuff that's been raised by John, but it's not
If you want to, once we close the
a
hearing
to close.
and we address, what the relief is, and confirm, exactly what relief is and is not needed. And then we confirm exactly what conditions have been stipulated to by the applicant to date. It's certainly my opinion that the board has the right to request further stipulations of the applicant, and consider, if they're not granted the imposition, so long as they're legal, weigh in on that of additional conditions.
Okay, it won't be a surprise, it's just,
So this can be done in the normal course
Normal
once,
course.
there's also nothing wrong with you if you have something to ask the applicant now, either way. But we haven't yet finished the case, let alone
right,
gotten to the point of, going through all that so that you can have a proper deliberation and vote.
there were a number of, and mostly these came from John's report, but, just, oh, by the way, they would need, oh, by the way, they'll need a relief from something, which we would tend to fix. And it's just like, oh, by, just mechanically, they need relief, from 4 or 5 items.
I'm sorry, from,
Relief for 4 items. Some are trivial, you just need to do it because they have to have.
We're gonna go through the relief, what is required.
So, well, I'll see if there are any that fall off the back, but we'll handle it that way, at least described. It's not anything unusual or new. Okay,
Does the board at any point get to make remarks on how the presentation is being made by the applicant? And if we have comments on that, is there an opportunity for the board to?
is that deliberation?
That's deliberation. It sounds like, and that's when you decide with the relief before you, inclusive of conditions stipulated to, and you decide what you're gonna do, you deliberate, you discuss that, as we always have. And then at some point, somebody will make a motion second, and there'll be a vote, and we'll see if that vote carries.
There'll be a number of, there'll be a number of, stipulations that you may hear that will be related to construction. And we'll see. We haven't had a lot of details presented to us about actual construction activities, like how is it actually going to be done?
I'm sorry, how was it actually?
How is it actually gonna be constructed? But this will get into things like blockages and times and protections and so forth. And so some of that will be in stipulations, and then if there's other stuff, if there are other items, we'll try to identify them and cover them. I think that's. I just wanted to catch you up on sort of the reality of my situation. So now we can.
I have some questions for the applicant about the submission of the.
I'm sorry, can I, please, I'm sorry.
I have some questions to the applicant for the submission that was made to DOT.
Well, before we proceed, we've closed to the public. correct,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
Okay, and
right,
yeah,
everyone were close, right?
the applicant, it has an opportunity for rebuttal if the applicant wishes. But also, it's my opinion that members of the board can continue to ask the applicant questions. And, do you have any,
And then
different
I
opinion,
can
Mr.
summarize.
No, I don't take exception to it if I can answer the questions for sure. I do not have my traffic engineer here tonight, Mr. Sinoff, because we finished traffic testimony, been here at actually every other meeting, but
Right.
Well, my question is,
yep.
there's a letter from New Jersey DOT dated February sixth,
Mhm.
2024. And it references a submission of October sixth, 2023. And then it's a 7-page review. And much of that is a crossover between access and safe access and the design of the plan. So we're not stepping on New Jersey DOT regulations, nor are they stepping on ours.
Correct.
So, but so the 7 pages has some comments. And I also I've made multiple requests to the applicant for material. And like 2 or 3 days before the last hearing, this was submitted. And it wasn't in time for me to review it. But there's one comment on the last page of the letter that says, please note that you have 90 calendar days from the date of this correspondence to respond to the above items in their entirety.
Mhm.
And that's in their February 6th letter. And the June 20-something submission had nothing else that was submitted to DOT. So I'm curious on how the applicant proposes to address many of these aspects of the DOT that also affect our review of the site plan.
Sure, just like we would address any outside agency approval comments from the county, whatever approvals may be granted by this board are gonna be subject to the review and approval of those agencies. If DOT ultimately were to come back and impose some requirement that was otherwise contrary to the design plans we have here, much like same thing goes for the county for that matter, Mr. Simoff. If it made a change that required a modification to our site plan, we'd have to come back before the board.
Well, as an example, let's call each other first names because we've known each other.
Well, we certainly can. Being respectful.
By first name because we've known each other for so many years. But on number 4 of the report, it says they want to provide a plan showing the site distance triangles to confirm that the site distance of the proposed site driveway along 202 is adequate and there will be no obstruction to impede site distance for turning movements.
Right.
So
I'm sorry,
obviously,
say this is for,
turning movements. Site distance for turning movements. Obviously, the testimony was that the applicant didn't meet the standards for the site distance. And one of the aspects of meeting that is to move the building back a few feet. And you made efforts to do it with a 5-foot additional setback. But these issues, I think this is an important issue to the ability to turn left and right in and out of the driveway.
Al, we certainly agree with that too. My traffic engineer, Mr. Korak, is comfortable with the design. He believes that the DOT will issue the approval. If the DOT takes issue with that and requires some other revisions, well, then we're gonna have to come back and we're gonna have to address it with the board.
Well, because obviously the building setback blocks the site distance to meet the DOT standards. I mean,
I'm not a traffic engineer, Hal, so I'm not gonna address it.
So your consultant said it didn't meet the standard for this traffic, for the speed limit. He said nobody goes that speed limit, therefore it's not necessary to meet the standards. And I think that's an important issue that we have to address. Because it would affect the building setbacks that meet DOT standards. Unless you get a waiver.
Correct.
But the other thing is, But this letter goes on to say that if you don't supply the material that they requested in 90 days, there's the application will be withdrawn.
And we'd have to resubmit it. If they actually, if they considered it withdrawn, wouldn't we?
So do they, is it has?
I don't believe it's been withdrawn. I believe Mr. Park has had dialogue with the DOT.
But there's nothing in writing that says that,
I don't have anything further in writing from them now.
that's one of my major conditions. Or issues, it's not a condition, it's an issue.
Right, yeah. Well, we always have recognized we need DOT approval.
And it certainly, in the event there's an approval, it certainly would be one of the 100 or so conditions in the resolution. Yeah, that's the
But
case.
the question is,
With respect to all outside agencies, I can't disagree with the council's but analysis of subsequent conditions of approval, because if I did, that would be contrary to the law and the practice in the
so
state.
the only way to achieve the site distance is to move the building back
I think it's
for a limit or change the location of the driveway. And that would be a major issue on the site plan.
I think it's a DOT jurisdictional issue. And one that we understand, we have to comply with their requirements.
But Bob Graham just talked about the dilemma of,
I'm sorry, can I get that, Bob?
Bob Graham just spoke about the dilemma of whether to allow left turns in and out of the driveway, which is a control that this board has. Access to, I question the ability to not listen to this board as to the impact of turn movements in and out of the driveway, to provide safe ingress and egress. And that's just an issue that I'd like to put on the table before we go.
There is an implied, either real or implied stipulation, right, Steve, in terms of as was just described, getting the approvals of the affected agencies, correct?
That's in every resolution, absolutely, but
I just.
suffice to say that
I'm sorry, can I get one at a time, please?
in the event there's an approval with that list of conditions, it's anticipated that it would have an including but not limited to, and lay out each and every outside agency that's anticipated. And the beauty of including but not limited to means it includes all of them, it's not limited to them.
You understand my dilemma?
I think I do,
The turning movements.
but I'm not a traffic engineer either.
No, but the turning movements at the driveway are important, and both of us have jurisdiction over those turning movements. This board and DOT. Based on the material that's been submitted so far, the application's been automatically withdrawn. Because they didn't meet the.
I don't believe that's the case, Hal. I don't think you have the information. I don't have the information to answer it, so I would not jump to that conclusion that the application has been withdrawn. I mentioned earlier that I know you've dealt with the agency before, plenty. I'm sure you probably in your experience have had discussions with the various, project managers and so forth there. I know my engineer has as well. We also, again, I will just repeat, we understand that we are subject to the jurisdiction of the DOT. We're also subject to the county and their requirements as they relate to road improvements and traffic safety.
Well, the only point is, there's nothing in writing that's been submitted to this board that it's still valid. The application is still current,
Right.
because what's been submitted is
And,
said you didn't meet the 90-day. And usually when I do an application, if it comes close to the 90 days, I get an extension in writing. And if that extension has been granted, it would have been submitted on June 20th, something with this material.
It's certainly, as a board member, notwithstanding your experience, applicant can address that issue. We also have a board traffic engineer who's not a member of the board but actually the board's traffic engineer may or may not be able to add, shed some light onto the issue as well. I don't know. I'm just the attorney.
Can we ask them to right now?
Sure, yeah, my experience has been in these times with DOT. Number one, they are not meeting their timeframes responding to applicants. They had times and days to get this letter out, and counting from October to February, they were late. And often applicants, when they're having discussions with DOT and working out issues, will also extend the time to respond, and as long as the case manager at DOT is aware of active response going on or discussion, they will leave the file open. That's been my,
But there's nothing to indicate that there's been anything else submitted.
yeah, I'm not contradicting your experience, I'm just saying, if Mr. Korak's been in dialogue with DOT, there's an unwritten understanding that the file is not closed, and when the DOT does close the file on you, they will issue correspondence saying, we have not heard from you, your application's withdrawn, we'll get that letter. Sometimes you'll get a 30-day warning letter before that, and I don't think that's happened here either.
So if an application in worst case scenario was withdrawn, they have to reopen the application, is that?
Yeah, but to my understanding, they have not been notified, given a 30-day warning that it's gonna be withdrawn, or given a letter that it's been withdrawn, so I would assume it's still an open case at DOT.
But there's been nothing, the applicant, when we asked for the material that was submitted to DOT, there's been nothing submitted since this February 6th letter, according to the submission of the applicant.
Right, the applicant has not responded to this letter
Does anybody actually know that? You don't, you.
yet. Well,
I know that our engineer has been in contact with DOT. I cannot tell anyone here with certainty whether they formally submitted an extension letter request or, hey, we'll get back to you. What I do know is we have an application. We have not received any indication that it's been withdrawn. To Mr. McQueen's point, if it was, we'd have to resubmit, and we'd resubmit all the same materials, and application materials and plan materials, and follow through all the regular protocols we would have to with the DOT.
And also Mr. Simo's question, you don't know if any additional written materials have been provided to the DOT in response.
That's correct.
Can you excuse me? I have to plug in the laptop.
Sorry?
I have to plug in the laptop.
There's a plug right there.
Which is in there. Oh, yeah, this one right here. This one right here.
Are there any other questions that the board has of the applicant?
Oh, I'm not on the record.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Are there any other questions of the applicant that the board has before we hear whether or not the applicant has a rebuttal? And if not, before they proceed to a summation, before we go through the relief requested, the conditions, address that, and ultimately deliberate and vote.
I'm sorry, not immediately.
Ultimately, the board will ultimately deliberate and vote. And if there's nothing more, do you want to ask, counsel if he has any rebuttal, and if not, if he wants to proceed with summation?
Yeah, I don't have any rebuttal. We've certainly heard the comments and appreciate the comments of our neighbors. I do have a closing statement. It's gonna be a very brief closing statement. Although I am wondering, Mr. Warner, we should have a clarification as it relates to the relief We certainly acknowledge as it relates to relief, we have a couple things. We are fully compliant, with the parking requirement as it relates to, RSIS. I'm sorry, with respect to the redevelopment plan. We do technically have a de minimis, exception from the RSIS standards.
My notes had indicated that de minimis exception, and the term de minimis is what the RSIS uses. No one's making a judgment about how important it is or isn't. Okay, that's not my term, that's what RSIS uses. They call it a de minimis exception. The deviation I have is 134 provided, 164 minimum required. Under
Correct.
the
Under the
under
residential site
RSIS.
improvement standards.
I'm sorry, the,
Residential site improvement standards.
Is that the correct deviation or magnitude?
That sounds like the magnitude,
Okay,
correct.
so that's one item that,
Well, we're compliant. What it really boils down to, in the old days, you had to submit to DCA. DCA doesn't take those submittals, or those submittals are no longer required for their approval purposes. We also have a deviation that did pop up because we changed.
Just
roof-
one, just
Yep.
something back on that. That 164, that's before EV credits, right?
I'm sorry, that's before.
Electric vehicle credits,
I believe you are correct.
so it might not be as wide a discrepancy.
Correct.
Okay. thank
Yep.
you.
How many EV sites, I mean, what cities? We need to, so we have it on record, we need to understand the.
I know it is on the record because we've gone through it. So I knew somebody was gonna ask me this question. Number of EV spaces.
Day one.
Yeah,
Well, the key is want to determine the credit you've got
Yeah.
against the 164 if that's applicable.
They need 16 make-ready spaces.
I'm sorry, I can't hear him.
Mr. Brook, that's Bob Brightly, the board's engineer. Go ahead, Bob.
Right, so, if you include the electric vehicle parking spaces, the residential component requires 122 parking spaces. That's what I have for RSIS.
I'm sorry, it's hard for me to hear a little bit. Can I get the last?
The residential
Right, so
component.
in accordance with residential site improvement standards, the project, the number I have is 132 parking spaces. 164 units. That's for the residential component.
And then the commercial component?
For-
Oh, no, that doesn't come into play for RSI.
No.
correct.
So do they actually comply?
Did they actually apply?
Well,
I, with the math in my head, got them.
So I wouldn't leave them any parking spaces for the commercial. The 68 units requires 102 parking spaces under the redevelopment.
Yes,
But for the RSIS exception, is there any deviation or not?
Yes, there is.
And what is the deviation?
My numbers for the residential component of the project, they require 132. They're
Right.
providing 102.
correct.
102?
So
Okay.
they're providing.
Does the applicant concur with that magnitude of deviation?
Correct.
Okay, so that's the deviation.
No, then, okay, are there any EV credits that get applied to
I
the
thought you were-
RSIS requirement?
Did you include the EV?
We've got 7 EV spaces.
Initially, right?
The project's gonna require, 16 make-ready spaces. That's 15% of the required 102 residential component.
Okay,
It has to be installed.
I'm sorry, can I get that one more time?
6 have to be installed,
immediately.
immediately, then within 3 years, there's an additional 6. And then within 6 years, the final 4 have to be installed.
All right,
I'm sorry,
isn't there-
can I get the last thing? It's, yeah. He's not sure. Really.
Speak up, please, Bob.
This is all in our report, but just to clarify again, they have to provide 16 spaces. So within 6 initially. Within 3 years, they have to install an additional 6, and then within 6 years, they have to install the final 4.
So does a 30 space deviation get reduced by virtue of their agreement to provide those electric vehicle charging spaces and make ready spaces?
So no more than 10% can be reduced, so that's, well, 102, that's 10, that brings their parking requirement for residential down to 122.
Right, that's what you said.
Okay, so now is it a 20 space deviation that they are requesting for RSIS purposes to the extent it's applicable?
Well, if they were to implement 10.
Yeah.
But they said it's
So I guess my question is whether RSIS recognizes the EV law.
that's the question.
But I would, yeah, I mean, that's the law.
That,
So,
it would have to be recognized by RSIS because the overarching policy is to require EVs. So
Right.
It makes sense that.
I just wondered if the credit is recognized, that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. So 122 versus 102, a 20 space deviation to the extent that the RSIS exemption, to the extent it's required, notwithstanding the representation that CCA doesn't require it anymore. That's one
you say 20 spaces.
arguable deviation.
What?
20.
What?
But they are compliant with the redevelopment.
They are compliant with, but that's what I get.
Yes. And if it's okay, I mean, if we ask questions, this has been 4 months, a lot of these stipulations are old, so.
Oh, yeah, we haven't even got to the stipulations, this is the relief requested.
So you've got that, right? So I
Yeah,
can check.
all right.
it off.
So that-
You've got
that's
the de
one.
minimis exception from our side.
Right, to the extent applicable, that's the
Okay.
magnitude of the deviation, correct, counsel?
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
We also have a deviation that was picked up, and we discussed it during architectural testimony. We are implementing gambrel roofs, which were actually one of the recommendations. And Mr. Zabo, you can correct me, I think you're only allowed to have flat roofs or slope roofs that didn't include a gambrel roof, which I'm not really sure what the difference is, because it's a sloping roof structure. I believe everyone was comfortable, at least with that roof design and it being recognized as
That
a
would be
deviation.
the design standard waiver.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
The
I'm sorry.
design standard waiver, not a variance. An exception, design exception.
And that is required, Mr. Sabo, notwithstanding the fact that a flat or pitched roof is permitted because a gambrel roof is interpreted to be something other than flat or pitched.
That is correct.
That's the interpretation from our planner.
It's not.
And you captured that.
But that,
You captured that, it's really.
I captured that, is the applicant, does the applicant concur that that relief is required?
Yes,
Okay, that's, 2.
Design standard where.
though I don't know why that's not considered a pitched roof, but I'll leave that to Mr. Zabo.
We never.
And then lastly, we have the issue of height of the building. We are compliant, height, relative to feet. It remains our position, that we are compliant as it relates to stories. This design, this project, and while it has changed, architectural changes, et cetera, this has always had this design, with the 4 levels and the lower level of parking that is on the back side of the building. It was part of presentations that were made during the redevelopment planning process. It was part of a presentation that was made, I believe, before this planning board, before the redevelopment agreement was executed back in 2023. So over the course of that time, we believe that that is the base. I know there were discussions last month about it being something that either the board is going to interpret or make a determination whether you believe it requires variance relief. It would be C variance. We are talking about stories. We are not talking about height in terms of feet, which is the measure that, delineates between a C and D variance.
And it would technically be a deviation from the redevelopment plan, since we're not under traditional zoning, but the local redevelopment and housing law, the redevelopment plan is the zoning. But in essence, it would equate to the C variance criteria for that deviation, if indeed it's interpreted as 5 stories versus 4.
We discussed this at the last meeting, and the discussion centered around the information that was presented at the time it was presented to the council. The design hasn't wavered or changed from what was incorporated into the agreement and into the plan. We didn't have the actual dimensions and things like that, so that's why it was worded the way it was. But I accept the applicant's interpretation that we established for 408. And that's how we're determining height because of the grades and the cross grades that are occurring there. It was a challenge to come up with language and to better or worse, that's the language we came up with.
Are you saying, Mr. Sabo, that height was determined to be from the 408 foot pre-development grade, both in linear feet height as well as in stories? Is that your interpretation?
That was the way the project was viewed when it was developed, yes.
I thought we came down, not this,
And-
not saying any of that, we came down to, look, we do need to prepare and as a variance from the 5-story aspect.
But that's
It's
for the,
based on the merit, but the point is, what
I'm
does that
sorry, based
create a
on that.
problem? I thought we agreed that, and your report says it, John, that a variance is needed for
It
the
was.
5-story.
Initially, because we measured it, but then when we looked at it from the perspective of how this project evolved, the applicant's position made sense, but.
I'm talking about the merit.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Whatever
if you
the
could ask-
history of the project is, the literal language says 4 stories.
Mhm.
And, whether that was, something that wasn't considered when they looked at the diagrams, it says 4 stories. Now, whether he's entitled to a variance on that is a different question. If you look at the provision that you cited last week, that's not in the plan, but it is in the general,
Correct.
zoning law. It deals with what happens when the property slopes away
Mhm.
from the primary street. This is not the primary, that's not slope away from the primary street. in this
I'm sorry,
case.
this is not.
No, it's not slope away from the primary street in this case. But I think, should you choose to do so, you could look at that and say under I can't quote the language for variances, that that you're entitled to a variance on that because of the geographical nature of the property, and it doesn't affect.
The language in the redevelopment plan permits the board to grant.
I'm sorry, can I, it's hard,
The
but I have to.
redevelopment plan permits the board to grant C-related variances based on the criteria of the residence law, which is based on some physical nature of the hardship that is presented to the applicant, which prevents them the strict application of complying, or under the C2 balancing test, whether or not the benefits of granting relief outweigh the substantial detriments.
but whether the benefits substantially outweigh the detriment.
So that is the flexible C.
So maybe if they made the application for the variance, I consider it, but I understand what you're saying. The other thing, the other design variance,
I think that case could be made, but that's up to the board.
I'm sorry, I didn't, we kind of we were talking at the same time. Can I get that?
No, it's a board interpretation, and the board can consider the slope, the intent of the plan, where it's oriented, the fact that the frontage on Mount Airy Road is not the principal frontage, that the deviation is not substantial facing the railroad. And those are considerations the board can deliberate on.
2 things, you gotta decide whether it's needed, and if so, you gotta decide whether it's granted.
Right.
That's simple. The applicant's taking a different position, saying it's not needed. You heard from the planner, you decide. But you gotta decide on both.
And I'm sorry.
Again, in regard to the redevelopment plan, I think we're breezing over the fact, and I think the applicant is saying it's not needed because, the design intent wasn't there, or, it was taken into account when it was, the redevelopment plan was, put together. But the redevelopment plan itself in building height has one issued one, topic on the elevation of being 408, but then it has 4 items that relate to the number of stories. So there was thought that was put into it, and, you know, whether it slopes away and whether it was, part of the original design and didn't come up somehow, that's one thing, but, you know, you can't have both. You know, if both of the criteria are there, they should be met, as far as I'm concerned, or relief should be asked for.
Well, a couple things, I do just want to make clear, Morristown Road is under the redevelopment plan, the primary road, and so that is how it is designated. So that is the road we are sloping away from. We will certainly, I'm not gonna stand on principle, we'll certainly amend our application to request the variance relief and the alternative to the extent it's necessary. We do believe that variance relief can be granted both under the C1 hardship criteria, due to the configuration of the property, due to the topography of the property, et cetera, that creates this grade differential from Morristown Road, where we always interpret it, we're gonna have 4 stories, and the property drops off. Certainly, you know, the board can look at that. Part of its charge is to view whether the positives outweigh the negative impacts that are associated with it. And we believe that is certainly the case in this regard. We are providing the parking for this project and structured parking to get cars off the road to suit the development and to meet the parking needs that are established in the ordinance and the densities, the minimum square footage of commercial space and the like. We do not believe that the grant of this variance relief would substantially impair the intent and purposes of zone plan and zoning ordinances. Bernardsville certainly doesn't impair, in our opinion, the intent as it relates to this particular redevelopment plan and the vision the Borough Council had when it designated the area in need of redevelopment in 2022. Went through about a year of design on this, ultimately coming up with a redevelopment plan that I believe was adopted in May of 2023. We also believe it would apply the flexible C2 variance. We are relating specifically to one specific property. It's criteria 1. We believe there are multiple purposes of the land use law. They are set forth at NJSA 4055D2. Those are really the purposes of zoning. And some of those purposes, and I don't have my zoning ordinance in front of me right now. But it speaks to a mix of development opportunities, both including residential, commercial development.
So you're testifying
One of the
to this?
criteria. I'm stating what the law is, Hal, and I believe I can cite to what the law is relative to what is there. And I'll ask Mr. Zabo what his thoughts are on it as the board's planner. And for the same reasons, we do not believe that there's substantial detriment to the public good as a result of this. And believe that the positives outweigh the detriments.
But Mr. Warren, can you deliberate on whether you think it's needed? You said there were 2 questions we have to answer.
Well, in the context of deliberations, when we get there, yes. But as I have it, there are as many as 3 deviations from the redevelopment plan. I don't have any others, Mr. Zabo, Mr. Bradley. Do you have any others?
I have one more.
Bear with me, I just want to see if the professionals have any others before we ask the board members. Do you have any others? Even potential?
Potentially, something that the board needs to talk about is the emergency generator, and the language when you on the plan. What evolved was the original plan ordinance was introduced by council. On referral to the planning board, there were a series of recommendations the board made to amend the plan, which is an ordinance, to the council. There were about a dozen comments or so that was sent. Not all of them were incorporated in the plan, but in an effort to work with the planning board, the governing body adopted most of them. And one of them was, and I believe it was at the suggestion of the chairman, that emergency generator be placed be incorporated into the development, which they have. But that there's a requirement that, there be condos to each, unit, which, is not something that's required by code, as I understand the code. And was something that came from this board that was incorporated into the plan. And that's the genesis of that. Now, I don't know if the applicant, can talk to that, but I'm not sure whether that's the case here, or whether it's practically require that level of connectivity.
Doesn't it say that emergency power will be provided to the residential units?
If I'm reading it correctly, and if I have the correct one on page 31, it says emergency power sufficient to provide interim power to the residential portion of the development shall be provided in the event that electrical service to the development is interrupted. This requirement shall include the running of conduits to each unit within the proposed development.
Okay. Yeah, fine.
So from our perspective, we're gonna view that as a deviation. We are not proposing full power into every unit. I know of no multifamily project that provides full power. It would overload circuits, et cetera. What we are proposing, which is standard, which is code, is that we will provide power for all life safety systems, emergency lighting, et cetera, including the elevators as well. I don't believe the elevators are actually code required, but we are providing.
And that's where we digress. That's not what was requested.
So to the extent that the language cited was accurate from the redevelopment plan, it appears as if that would be assuming the other three are deemed to be deviations, that would be a fourth deviation from the redevelopment plan. Isn't that correct, counsel, for the applicant?
That'd be correct.
Okay, so that's as many as 4.
There's another one.
There's
You
a,
got none? No? Okay.
there's a requirement in the plan that the entrances to all buildings be either on the primary street or to a public space. The entrances to the building are into private space, then they don't comply with that provision of the plan.
Counsel, do you want to double check the redevelopment plan for the accuracy of that statement?
Yeah.
Whether or not that's in the plan, and if so, to the extent to which you're you believe you are compliant, or perhaps stipulate that you are not compliant.
Give me a second.
So, do you remember where that was?
On page 31 of the plan.
I think it's number 2 under architectural.
Yeah. Yeah. Primary entrances, I guess I just view that as primary entrances for the commercial.
Well, we do also have the primary residential one.
I'm sorry, it's that?
The primary residential one going.
Right. Well, it's a general orientation.
Well, the buildings are in,
Yeah,
but the entrance is that face the street.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
So the building has to be oriented.
How is it not compliant? I mean, there's a archway, there's a walkway in.
Because the entrance to the building is.
Define entrance, because the archway is the way into the building, that's why.
No, the archway is the way into the
Development, which gets you to the entrance, because you know where this.
John, this is
Fine.
most of the design variance.
Just need to
It's an
capture
exception, you can
it.
identify where that comes from is the downtown design guidelines. And where we wanna have the storefronts facing the street.
I
That's really the
understand.
intent.
I understand, I'm a little. And if that's what it says.
Yeah.
We should cover it.
You have to capture it.
It would be considered a design exception.
Not a variance.
No. It's under architecture.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last
It's
thing.
under the architectural section.
Chairman, our court reporter asked if she could take a 5-minute break. She's been going for an hour and a half.
Yeah,
Acceptable.
yeah.
All right,
Do we need a motion to extend? Are we getting close to the hour?
Yeah, I'll move to extend. Yeah, it's been an hour to 11:30. Second.
All in favor? Aye.
I'm sorry, did they say they're going to 11:30?
What's that?
I'm sorry, did they say they're going to 11:30?